I would be very careful always in the Dhamma of the word should, because really it's not about sort of what we should think or shouldn't think, but it's like, what is my mind doing and how is this affecting me? When I think in kind of binary ways, what is the impact of that? Some ways of thinking in terms of good and bad, wrong and right are actually very wholesome, because we do need to differentiate between actions that cause suffering and actions that cause wholesome states to increase. That's an aspect of having right views. Another teaching of the Buddha is that yes, we can use metta, we can use compassion when facing people, who are difficult, but sometimes we have to use another method, which is actually taking distance. Ignore the person. And this sounds a little bit almost harsh, doesn't it, to us? Aren't we meant to be kind Buddhists who just embrace everybody? But everybody includes ourselves, right? We are one of those persons that we should be including in the sphere of our loving kindness and compassion. And sometimes we just need a break. We just need a little bit of distance. When you're strong enough, you will be able to have more loving kindness to the difficult person. But see if you can creep up on them gradually.
I like to joke that I'm only non-dual half the time.
That's good.
All my jokes are good, Ajahn.
That's really good. I like that.
Friends, welcome to episode 41 of Vibe with Venerables, 1 hour of live Dharma and dialogue where you get to talk directly to a respected Venerable. I'm Meng, co-founder of Buddhism.net and your host. Our honored teacher today is the awesome Ajahn Canda. Ajahn Canda is the founder and spiritual director of the Anukampa Bhikkhuni Project, a UK charity developing Britain's first monastery for women aspiring to Bhikkhuni ordination. They have since acquired a peaceful property in Oxfordshire to become Anukampa Grove Bhikkhuni Monastery. And as a teacher, Ajahn Canda is widely admired, not just for her wisdom, but also for her warmth and inclusivity. By the way, her schedule is always very tightly packed, and she made a Herculean effort to find time to teach us. So we are very lucky to have her, and we are very grateful. In today's class, Ajahn will discuss the Suttas that reflect the Buddha's ethics of inclusivity and mutual respect. Ajahn will speak for roughly 30 minutes and then answer your questions live. As a reminder, this session will be recorded and then uploaded onto YouTube later. And if you're comfortable doing so, we'd like to invite you to turn your camera on so that you can be seen by Ajahn Canda. With that, dear friends, Ajahn, can we invite you by starting off with, can we invite you to start us off with a blessing?
Absolutely. So I will just pay respects to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha and also say how wonderful it is to be with you. And thank you. If you do feel comfortable to turn your camera on, it's marvelous for me because I get to see your wonderful faces and already have a sense that we're in a diverse and beautiful, inclusive community. So I really appreciate everybody's presence here. So let's pay respects. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammam Sangham Namasami. Okay, so I'm here today. I think it's the 4th episode that you're doing for the Vibe with Venerables for the Vesak month. And Vesak, for anyone who doesn't know, is a celebration on the moon day of May of the Buddha's birth and his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree and also his passing away into final parinibbana. And the Buddha's awakening is the most important of these, to my mind. And he showed us by basically overcoming, eradicating, uprooting greed, hate and delusion that it's possible for all human beings to do the same and to experience the pinnacle of happiness, the highest happiness and peace of Nibbana. Another really beautiful aspect of his life and teachings is that he showed that the path can be taught It's not only a path that he walked as an Indian man 2,600 years ago, but it's a path that is universal. And he said that wherever you find people practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, there you'll find enlightened beings, irrespective of gender, irrespective of race, irrespective even of religion. If you're practicing the Eightfold Path, you're on the path to awakening. And this universality of the teachings is so fundamental to the efficacy of the Dhamma, because all beings, the Buddha said, desire happiness and recoil from pain. Anyone here want to suffer and continue suffering again and again and again in life after life? No. So the Buddha's whole life was lived, and he also taught the Dhamma for the benefit of all beings. And yet one aspect of his life that I think is very rarely discussed is his formation of what we call the Fourfold Assembly, his dedication, which was an intention from the outset, soon after his enlightenment, that he develop a Sangha, an assembly of enlightened men, women, monks and nuns. Okay, and this was meant to be an inclusive term. The Fourfold Assembly meant to include all beings, whatever gender, identity, whatever race, whatever background they had. It was supposed to be a kind of umbrella term. And so today I want to talk about how that came to be, and some of the Buddha's own ideas around caste and gender, which were two very entrenched kind of views in the Buddha's day. The caste system was deeply entrenched, and it was a culture of Brahmanical superiority. And it was also ancient India, and even India today, it was a deeply patriarchal society where women were either owned by or considered property of their husband, their father, or even their elder brother, and also remained dependent on them. So the Buddha was very radical in breaking down these barriers to create inclusive community and give everybody an opportunity to awaken. And I think this is so important, isn't it, in today's climate of a lot of political and social divide, a lot of polarization, a lot of scapegoating of people who are not like us. And so I thought that today we could really celebrate what it means to create a really inclusive community, and to try and inspire ourselves to do that as well. So I'm going to be referring to a few suttas along the way, and the first one is on the subject of caste. And because of this culture, this Brahmanical culture that the Buddha lived within, a lot of Brahmins would come to the Buddha. There's a whole chapter in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses, called the Brahmana Vagga. And it has all these different stories about Brahmins approaching the Buddha with quite a superior and smug kind of attitude. So the first one I want to refer to is number 93 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And I'm just going to paraphrase because it's far too long for this session. So this Brahmin was called Assalāyanasutta, and he went with a large number of Brahmins to the Buddha, presumably to intimidate the Buddha or to try. And he said, "The Brahmins are the highest caste, others are inferior. The Brahmins are the fairest caste. Those of any other caste are dark. Only Brahmins are purified, not non-Brahmins. And Brahmins alone are the sons of Brahma, born from his mouth." And the Buddha says, showing his wit, "Brahmin women are seen having their periods, becoming pregnant, giving birth and giving suck. Yet still, they say, the Brahmins are the highest caste, others are inferior. The Brahmins are the fairest, others are dark. The Brahmins are purified, etc. And only the Brahmins are born from Brahma's mouth." In other words, all of us are born from a womb. So where is the relevance? How can we be conceited about that? Isn't that rather humbling to know that we're all born in just the same way? He then refuted various other wrong views that this Brahmin had. The Buddha said that anybody of any of the castes who kills and holds wrong view is likely to reappear in an unhappy destination, even in hell. In other words, caste, status, privilege, gender, any of these external designations cannot save you from the law of karma. If you do good, it will lead to goodness. It will lead to a fortunate time now in this life and also in the future. If you act from an unwholesome state of mind, you're creating suffering not only for yourself but for many other people, many other beings. The Buddha then asks this Brahmin, are only Brahmins capable of developing loving kindness? And the Brahmin reluctantly has to say, no, all 4 castes can practice loving kindness. He then asks, are only Brahmins capable of taking a loofah and bath powder to a river and washing off the dust and dirt? Because this was a common belief in the Buddha's day, or in the Brahmanical culture, that if we go and purify ourselves by washing in the river, basically we're free from any bad karma. So are only Brahmins capable of that? No, anyone can do that. Anyone can purify their mind. And the Buddha becomes more tricky now. He says, if there are 2 brothers, one who's studious and astute and the other is not, who would you feed first, the learned one or the other one? Well, we'd feed the learned one first, of course. So then the Buddha says, okay, but what if one was studious and astute and of good character? What if one was studious and astute of bad character, and the other was not studious nor astute, and was of good character? Then who would you feed first? Well, then we'd feed the one of good character first, even though they're not studious and astute. So I think the Buddha's won the argument, hasn't he? And he says, first you took a stand on birth, after that on scriptural learning, and after that on the very ground that purification for all 4 castes is for all 4 castes, just as I described. And at that the Brahmin he fell silent and was dismayed, his shoulders drooping, his head down, he was glum and without response. So this is how the Buddha turned these notions of caste upside down. And we see this throughout the suttas. There's another lovely sutta I want to refer to called the Vāseṭṭhasutta. And this is Majjhima number 98. This is you can research all this after the session if you're interested. And this one shows how there is no distinct racial difference between humans. Nothing worth commenting on. So the Buddha says, while species of animals are determined by birth with distinct differences, there are no distinct differences for human beings. And to summarize, he goes through the various characteristics that we often can try to make too much of. He says, not in the body parts, not in the features, not in our genitals, not in ways of mating, not in color, nor in voice. Any distinction is purely verbal designation only. So there's nothing to really, tell us apart. He then goes on to redefine the term Brahmin, because of course the Brahmins again felt that they were superior, they were the best. And the Buddha took that word and related it to something quite different, to one's character, not one's birth. So the Buddha says, I call one a Brahmin, not because of their origin or lineage, but as someone who is free from clinging, awakened, endures difficulty without hate, who is patient, dutiful, virtuous, humble, who knows the end of suffering, has deep understanding, is wise, is fully awakened, an arahat. And at the end of this sutta, there's a little verse that says, Karma makes the world go round. Living beings are bound by karma, bound by their ethical intention and their action that ensues from that. So it doesn't matter what our race, caste, religion really is, whether we're male, female, gender non-binary, whether we're transgender, who we mate with, right? Whether we're gay, queer, straight. What really differentiates a human being from another is the ethical quality of their character. And so how did this translate into the way the Buddha formed the Sangha, the community of disciples around him? And there's a very nice story of Upāli, who was a barber before he became a monk. And in Upāli's ordination story, he went to ordain with 6 princes who were of a much higher caste. And it was very beautiful. These princes understood that renunciation sort of takes away all those, all that status. And they actually invited the barber to ordain first. So Upāli ordained before them, and this meant that for the rest of their life they would have to pay respects to this barber. And it would vastly reduce their pride, because in the Sangha, in the way the Buddha formed his community of monastics especially, seniority went not by caste or former status, but simply by who ordains first. In other words, by a person's renunciation and how long they've been in the robes. And Upāli ended up becoming a fully enlightened monk who was expert in the Vinaya. And the Vinaya is the monastic code for monks and nuns. And he actually recited this after the Buddha's passing away. And due to him, we have it preserved to this day. So this really turned this sort of social hierarchy and status upside down, and was a radical statement for the Buddha to make in those days, and obviously has had long-lasting beneficial effects for all of us here, especially the monastics. So the next theme, which is obviously deeply entrenched in many cultures, is that of gender. And as I said, India still is actually a very patriarchal country. Most of the world is. I do believe there are a few matriarchal societies, but most of the time gender has implications in the worldly life. And yet even so, in the Buddha's day, many women became enlightened. And there's a collection called the Therigatha, which is one of the oldest collections of women's poetry in the world today. And it tells stories in the women's own words of their awakening and their stories of their lives that led up to that awakening. So it contains many kind of jubilant expressions of having ended suffering. And, the women who became enlightened were from every possible background. There were merchants' daughters, there were Brahmins, there were women who'd lost their children, there were people who went forth in later life, there were prostitutes, all kinds of people. And all of them became enlightened, showing that, again, gender makes no difference, and nor does what you've even been through in your life, if you can use that to understand suffering and to awaken to the truth. So I wanted to read out a very beautiful sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya. It's in the verses on bhikkhunis, which is chapter 5, and it's the Somāsutta. And this is a very nice one. So the Bhikkhuni Soma, even though India was a fairly dangerous place for women at that time, had gone out that day after taking her meal and gone to the blind man's grove for the day's abiding, in other words, to meditate on her own. And she sat at the foot of a tree. Then Mara, the evil one, desiring to arouse fear, trepidation and terror in the Bhikkhuni Soma, desiring to make her fall away from stillness, approached her and addressed her in verse. So I hope people know who Mara is. Mara is like the personification of one's own defilements, but it's also a mythical being who lives in one of the Deva worlds and really doesn't want to see people get enlightened. So whatever doubts you have, whatever sort of weaknesses you have, Mara will exploit that and sound very convincing, but basically he's just trying to prevent you from full awakening. But in this case, Mara didn't realize that this nun was already a fully enlightened arahat. So he says to her, that state so hard to achieve, which is to be attained by the seers, can't be attained by a woman with her two-fingered wisdom. Then it occurred to the Bhikkhuni Soma. Now, who's this reciting the verse? A human being or a non-human being? This is Mara, who recited the verse, desiring to arouse fear, trepidation and terror in me, and desiring to make me fall away from stillness. Having understood this, the Bhikkhuni Soma replied to him in verses. How is womanhood or gender relevant at all when the mind is stilled well, when knowledge flows on steadily as one sees correctly into Dhamma? One to whom it might occur, I'm a woman, or I'm a man, or I am anything at all, is fit for Mara to address. Then Mara, the evil one, realizing the Bhikkhuni Soma knows me, sad and disappointed, disappeared right there. Just like that Brahmin, shoulders drooping, oh, my wrong view has been seen. So the significance of this verse is really to show that the voice of, which says that women are different, women don't have the same wisdom, women can't be enlightened. This is not the voice of wisdom. This is not the voice of reason. This is the voice of Mara, the voice of delusion and of wrong view. So gender is inconsequential and irrelevant to awakening. And I wanted to talk about how this understanding, which obviously she had, and it wasn't only that gender was irrelevant, right? But any kind of self-view, one who thinks I am anything at all, is fit for Mara to address, right? So this influenced the development of the Fourfold Assembly. Again, one of the Buddha's most important life aims. And recently, actually, in Buddhist communities throughout the world, I think especially in Bhikkhuni communities who've experienced a lot of marginalization, we've started thinking about this term Fourfold Assembly in different ways. And one of the phrases I really like being used is manifold assembly, to make sure people understand that this includes everybody across the genders. It's not a binary thing. And an even nicer way to think of it, I think, eventually, once it's been clear that we can include everybody in this, is the twofold assembly, the monastics and the lay people. Why not a twofold assembly if gender is irrelevant to awakening, right? And then in the same way that in the Vāseṭṭhasutta it said that a person's worth is in their conduct, is in their actions. In the same way we define people according to what they do, according to how they live. So some of us will practice as lay people, some of us will practice as monastics. And everybody was included in this. So from the outset, lay people were also integral to this community, to the Buddha's community. And lay people also attained liberation, at least up to full awakening, very, very close to full awakening. And then the belief was that you had to ordain, because there was no other reason to carry on as a lay person. You haven't got any desire anymore. So it's natural, isn't it, that you'll live a very renounced lifestyle. So all human flourishing has to be mutual. And this is an understanding that I think all indigenous cultures have. And humans flourish in community. This has been shown again and again. So the Buddha's communities were inclusive by design. And this is important for a number of reasons. First of all, having a manifold or a twofold or a fourfold assembly means that the Dhamma can be preserved and it can spread widely in an authentic and accessible way, and in a way that remains relevant to the largest possible number of people. Right? If the Dhamma is only relevant to one particular group of people, for example, Indian men, then what is the point? What is the point? We're still a fractured society. And suffering is universal. Suffering is a universal experience among all humans, even all animals, and therefore the solution must be universal. It must be a solution that works for all. Another reason this is so important is because exclusion perpetuates suffering in extremely damaging ways. I remember Ajahn Brahm telling me the story, 2 stories actually, that really moved him in his life. He's my teacher back in Perth. And one was when a gay man came to him and said, "Religion has been so cruel to gay people." And it was just the look in his eyes and the way he said this that really moved my teacher. And I must say, developing a Bhikkhuni Sangha has by extension naturally led to me trying to include people of every gender identity and also sexual orientation. I mean, it's none of my business anyway, but why should it matter, right? How is that relevant at all when the mind is well stilled and purified? So we are not here to perpetuate discrimination. Discrimination is basically related to defilements, right? And is incompatible with an enlightened mind. So an enlightened person will naturally be inclusive, have loving kindness to all. Another really important reason for a manifold assembly or a twofold assembly which is inclusive is because of the power of having a role model, the power of representation, the power of being able to relate to someone who is like me and who I can look up to. Somebody who may have attained deep stillness or may have actually realized the truth, perhaps to the level of stream winning or above. And if they can do it, maybe so can I. Again, if enlightenment is only for something for people 2,600 years ago, what relevance does that have for me? But the fact is, people are still getting the same results they always got. It's only a matter of walking this eightfold noble path. And also, I think the formation of a fourfold assembly or a manifold assembly or a twofold assembly was the Buddha's compassion for later generations. He had that foresight. If he'd have said, right, very good, I'm enlightened now, done and dusted, I'm going to sit under a tree for the rest of my life, none of us would be here, right? The Buddha knew that you would be here, that I would be here, or people like us would be here. Yeah? And for that reason, he formed the fourfold assembly with the foresight and compassion for future generations. So again, a mind that's developed wisdom, compassion and loving kindness to such a high degree will naturally express this in terms of being incredibly non-judgmental, incredibly inclusive, and extend the scope of their compassion and concern to all beings, beyond beings who we like, beings who we have a natural affinity for, and beings who are like us, who are like ourselves. So one of the challenges, one of the things that the Dhamma is asking us to do is to widen the circle of our compassion and concern to include all living beings. And part of this is learning to see the humanity in all beings. Yeah. Sometimes people who are at a distance, who we never really meet, we can't really relate to them well enough. And I think in those cases it's so important to try to meet people who are different. If you can't meet them, read about their culture, read about their history, read stories of Palestinian women, read, books about Sudan, learn about the situation in Myanmar and try to imagine yourself in these people's shoes. I read a lovely phrase, I hadn't heard this before, about the way we sometimes see a stranger as not having as much interiority as us, and reminding us that all people have just as much interiority. It means a kind of inner life. They feel grief, they feel distress, they feel intense love and protection for their children. We all have these same feelings and also the capacity to awaken. So the Buddha says, loving kindness should be developed even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child. But it's different. It's different from a mother's love. He goes on to say, so to all living beings we should develop that same sense of loving kindness. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so to all living beings. And imagine that. Imagine seeing or perceiving somebody you don't even know just as your own child. And there's a very inspiring person who came to stay with us for a while, a gender non-binary person. And they're actually planning to go to Palestine. And originally I think they'd wanted to go and work on the olive groves, because having the presence of a white person there acts as a kind of human shield at a time that's very, very critical, to harvest the olives and to protect people's lives. But anyway, they're going a little bit earlier in June, and I'm just full of admiration for them. They're even learning Arabic to, go there and have the most possibility to relate to the people and to learn about their lives and to really show that solidarity and support. And that reminds me of this verse, even as a mother protects with her life, because they are literally putting their lives at risk by going. Is that incredibly inspiring or what? Okay, I'm almost through because I know we have a time limit and you want to ask questions, but there's one more thing I want to share, and that is that we also have to extend our loving kindness outwards and unbounded, again, to all living beings. And recently I found a sutta I hadn't read before. Where is it? Where the Buddha actually criticizes the Jains. So the Jains were a kind of religion that also took shape during the Buddha's time. They were contemporaries to the Buddha. And they had some of the Buddha's ideas, but they weren't perhaps fully developed in such a way that the Buddhas were. Anyway, it has to be a competition, right? Because that makes things fun. And this little verse was given in the Vāseṭṭhasutta, that's Anguttara Nikaya number 3, verse 70. And he says that the Jains tell their disciples to lay down the rod towards living beings dwelling only 100 yojanas, and I worked out that that's about 800 miles in each direction. So they say spread loving kindness, but only 800 miles, okay? So the Buddha criticizes them. Thus they enjoin their disciples to be sympathetic and compassionate towards some living beings, but not towards others. Okay, so the Buddha's teaching is to spread loving kindness in a way that's outward and unbounded. And I like the simile of loving kindness as like the sun, shining equally and impartially on all beings. The sun doesn't say, oh, over here there's some insects or some scorpions or some snakes. I won't shine just there, Or over here there's only like white bhikkhunis. I won't shine over there. The sun shines everywhere, right? On bhikkhus, on bhikkhunis, on monastics, on lay people, on all beings, impartially and equally, without any conditions at all. So to conclude, wisdom and compassion, when fully mature and developed, naturally translate into inclusivity and non-discrimination, because we understand that any discrimination, any sort of pitting one person against another perpetuates suffering, and that's very opposite to the aim that the Buddha has. And the Buddhist communities are founded on principles of sharing, principles of mutuality. The Buddha said that there were certain principles that ensure harmony in the community. And the first one is to share views in common with our fellows in the community. So views that, harm, hatred, ill will, discrimination creates suffering. And all beings desire happiness and recoil from pain. And that view naturally leads to compassion, to loving kindness, and to a commitment to non-harm. We also should share virtue in common with the people we live with the people we create community with, especially if that community is intentional. We want to live with people who have good, virtuous conduct, and that improves ourselves. And we can inspire others too that way. He also talks about sharing food. In other words, we should share our resources, our food, our wealth, our property. We hold property in common with other beings. And it's not that, this person before was a very rich person, this person wasn't so rich, so we'll give this person a bigger share. No, it goes equally. We're creating equitable community. And lastly, the Buddha advises to have thoughts, words and deeds of loving kindness, not only in public, to someone's face, but also in private, when we're alone with ourselves, the way we think about others behind closed doors, the little acts we do for others that no one else knows about. We have thoughts, actions and words of loving kindness wherever we go. So this is the Buddha's take, or in brief, on inclusivity, showing that caste and gender and any other superficial differentiation we make between beings is irrelevant to awakening. We all have the capacity, and the Buddha spent his whole life establishing not only a very strong doctrine and system of teachings that have been preserved today, but also a beautiful assembly of disciples who represent the Dhamma in diverse ways, so that all of us can feel that liberation is possible for us. So this is my offering to you today, and may this be of benefit to you, and we can now have some questions if you wish.
Thank you, dear Ajahn. That was beautiful. Okay, friends, before we begin our discussion, let's just take a moment to absorb and digest the teachings we just received. And let's do that by just taking a breath. Thank you, friends. So if you have any questions for Ajahn Canda or any reflections you want to share with Ajahn, you can use the hand-raising function on Zoom, and then I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Or if you like, you can enter your questions on Zoom's Q&A function. Or if you see a question already asked, you can upvote it. We will generally give priority to live questions. And with that, we have a question from Jiwon. Jiwon, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Venerable. I have a question about the karma and also our social status. So one day I was very upset by reading one Korean Mahayana enlightened monk's book. So Koreans believe he was enlightened, so he was very famous monk in Korea. And then there was something like, maybe my memory is not correct, but maybe something like some bad karma made like woman body, something like that. So
Wow.
I was like, wow, how enlightened monk can say these kind of discriminatory things. But another my Dharma friend who is a woman, she said, oh, Jian, actually, why are you being upset? It's just because you are identified you as a woman body, because you are not now in this life, you are a woman. But actually, I'm not upset because it may be just as a state of fact that like maybe some condition made just another condition, like we did maybe something and then like that became a condition for woman body. But this is kind of neutral thing. Like I mean, this is not like his intention was not discriminatory. It's just like other scriptures say, when you make a good karma, like for example, when you are generous and giving something to others, then maybe in next life you also become more like a rich kind of thing. So it's just like cause and effect. It's nothing discriminative. So I was wondering.
Yes.
Okay. About.
Shall I answer?
Yes, please.
It's discriminating. It's wrong view. It's wrong view. So there's a couple of points here. I mean, one of the points I like to make is that it's important to first assess a person's actions and views, and then to use our own discernment as to what that says about a person's understanding and wisdom and how far they may have gone on the path, rather than first believe that somebody's enlightened and then try to accommodate the views and change the views and say, well, because he's enlightened, this view must be right. I would say it's the opposite. Because this view is actually wrong, this person is probably not enlightened, okay? There's very few fully enlightened people in the world, but I would consider that most people who've started to practice would understand, and if you read the Suttas, that gender is a construct, it's a fabrication. One of the things the Buddha absolutely said is that the human rebirth is an excellent rebirth. A human has the capacity for full awakening. He did not say only a male human rebirth is an excellent rebirth. Okay. Another thing is that karma cannot be worked out backwards. Okay, so I'll try and explain. If a person's generous, it's going to lead to a person becoming beautiful in another life. It's one of the factors that may lead to a person becoming beautiful. However, that does not mean that if a person's beautiful, it's because they were generous in a past life. There are other causes also for being beautiful, such as the parents that you're born to, right? And you might be physically beautiful, but then create a lot of anger in your mind, and actually you can end up looking quite ugly. There are people who aren't conventionally beautiful that have this shine, have this glow, because their hearts are so pure. You know, so really we're creating karma right now. The only karma we can be sure of is the way we're relating to our experience right now. The Buddha said it's too difficult to go backwards. You can never really go back and say, this is because of this in the past. So that's a wrong understanding of karma. So be assured that you have everything it takes for full liberation. The woman's body is incredible. If there wasn't such a thing as a woman's body, there would be no Buddha, because the Buddha was born from a womb, just like everybody else here. And yeah, women have everything it takes.
And do you have any recommendation for reading, for example, like just what you said? Probably you studied from somewhere, so
right,
maybe...
yeah. The Sutta on karma is somewhere in the Samyutta Nikaya. Now it's a big Samyutta and I forget, but there's basically like 7 or 8 reasons for the reason that things are happening the way they are right now. So, for example, one of them is karma. One of them is like the elements in nature, so the weather, for example. One is accidents. One is like the elements within the body, so disease is another cause for the way things are. And I would just recommend you to read the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. Remember, it's Mara who says this, right? So Mara says to Bhikkhuni Soma, women can't get to full awakening, essentially. And she says, that is Mara. That's the voice of Mara. So we have to be smart. We have to recognize that any sort of voice of discrimination that puts another person down for their gender or any other thing is the voice of Mara, not of wisdom. So I would say read the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. Somebody's already asked in the chat for the references. So that's Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 5, verse 2.
Thank
and
you.
also
Thank
maybe
you,
the
Jill.
Therigatha as well. Maybe I can just type it in while the next question is.
Yes, and for June, I recommend you read the
Thank you.
entire Samyutta Nikaya. Because June she's a researcher at Harvard. So yeah, that's her assignment. Read the entire Samyutta Nikaya. Okay, we have a question from Michael. Michael, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Venerable. My question is, I'm trying to achieve the first jhana, but I struggle with slot and topper, where I'll lay in bed and I'll meditate instead of getting up and meditating in a sitting position. And also I struggle to give up entertainment. Is there anything I can do?
Yes, stop the struggle and stop the desire for attainment. This is the first most important thing. It's a good aspiration to have, but the path leads to jhana, nothing else. Not our own will, not our own aspiration. Basically, it's the Eightfold Path. The Buddha said, Vosagaramana karitva labati samadhi labati chitta ekagata, just to impress you. And that means a person whose mind inclines to letting go, to abandoning, to relinquishing, to renouncing. Naturally, for a person whose mind does that, one naturally attains stillness, attains samadhi, one-pointedness of mind. So if we want jhana, we're creating a barrier for ourselves. We're actually creating an aim that's just a little bit too far for now. And sometimes we can forget about putting the causes in place when we have our mind set on a goal. So I would say have a look at your virtue first of all. So see if you can get more joy out of doing good, being generous, using your speech in beneficial ways, starting to turn inward a little more so that you're not kind of wasting energy on too much social media or other kinds of entertainment, right? Notice what effect that has on the mind and start to incline to the happiness that's developing inside as a result of virtue and good conduct. If you are sleepy, it's okay to lie down. Even 2 days ago, actually, I phoned my teacher, Ajahn Brahm, and I said, well, I feel quite anxious because actually at the moment the council are trying to tell us that we're some kind of resort or something when we're actually a monastery. Anyway, so I was a little bit anxious. I said, oh, I'm not sure, shall I just meditate and observe the anxiety? He said, why don't you just lie down and meditate that way and just really relax the mind? And if you give yourself long enough, you'll find that once the body and mind are relaxed sufficiently, energy will start to come back to the mind. So let your mind rest and even become dull for a while from time to time, and just wait, be patient, and eventually the energy, because you're not using your brain and you're not fighting the sloth and torpor, the energy will start coming back. So be patient and be very, very kind, very, very gentle, and start to get a taste for letting go. Yeah.
Ajahn, may I make a suggestion?
Big question.
Ajahn, may I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Yes. So here's a suggestion. And Michael, please feel free to discard. So there's a very powerful state of mind in meditation, which is that what is called threshold consciousness, which is the state right between awakening and sleep. Being fully awake and like in deep sleep, there's a boundary in between. And I find that when I descend into that, and if I can stay conscious while doing that, the body starts to fade away. And then the body starts to fade away, the weight of the body, the things, the negative, the afflictive stuff caused by the body starts to fade away. And then the mind is in the mind of letting go. And as Ajahn said, when they let go completely, that's when the mind is conducive to the jhanas. So then the next question is, how do we get there? And as Ajahn says, practice being lazy. She didn't say practice being lazy. I said practice being lazy. And the way to do that, my suggestion is to as you experience sloth and torpor, make use of that. Make sure that by watching yourself fall into sleep. Oh, I'm so tired, I can't meditate now, but watch yourself in that process. And so the mind, after a while, becomes familiarized with itself going into sleep. And because it familiarizes that, it becomes able, after a while, to stay conscious while going into that critical consciousness state. And because of that, it's able to get to a state and then letting go and become conducive to first jhana. That'd be my suggestion.
Brilliant.
Ajahn, do you agree with that? Yeah.
I think that's great. I'm going to try it later.
Yes, thank you. Yes, for a lazy person, that's my best meditation.
Maybe that's Ananda's method of enlightenment. One of the Buddha's chief disciples actually got fully awakened.
Yes, right. Yes, he got fully in between, like he was like going to sleep, and in between this awkward position, he got enlightened. Okay, so we go to one question from the Q&A board, and then we come back to a live question.
Sure.
Q&A board. This person asks, what would an enlightened mind look at? What would an enlightened mind look at our world today with all its divisiveness, war, and greed? And what about if the bully is our own family member?
Yeah, I think the way an enlightened mind would look at the world would be full of compassion and tender concern. Yeah. And you know that the Buddha in his lifetime, he used to actually have so much equanimity alongside that in the mornings he would actually survey the world with his psychic powers to find out where people were suffering the most. And he would walk sometimes straight into situations which were a threat to him. For example, when he surveyed the world and he actually saw Angulimala, who was a mass murderer of that time, and he'd been sort of set up by his bad teacher. Okay, don't follow a teacher like this, all right? His teacher had said, out of devotion, please kill 1,000 human beings and bring me their fingers to prove that you've done that. And being full of devotion but very little wisdom, he actually set about to do that. And he was on his 999th person. He was just looking for the last human being to kill. And the Buddha went to find him, to save him from that, knowing that he could then be that 1,000th person, right?
Yes.
And the Buddha used wisdom. He said to Angulimala the simple word, stop, Angulimala, stop. And Angulimala was so shocked by that, he actually realized that it meant stop the killing.
Yes.
So the Buddha put himself in the line of fire, but not always. Another teaching of the Buddha is that, yes, we can use metta, we can use compassion when facing people, who are difficult, or when, encountering ill will. But sometimes we have to use another method, which is actually taking distance. This is in the Anguttara Nikaya somewhere, I think. 5 methods of overcoming resentment. Yeah, so one of them is actually to ignore the person. And this sounds a little bit almost harsh, doesn't it, to us? Aren't we meant to be kind Buddhists who just embrace everybody? But everybody includes ourselves, right? We are one of those persons that we should be including in the sphere of our loving kindness and compassion. And sometimes we just need a break. We just need a little bit of distance. Ajahn Brahm says, love the tiger from a distance. So if you can, get a little bit of space from the difficult person from time to time. And then practice metta for yourself. When we practice loving kindness, it's important to start with the easy person. So if you're the easy person, great. If somebody else, a loved person, is the easy person, great. And by extension, when you're strong enough, you will be able to have more loving kindness to the difficult person. But see if you can creep up on them gradually.
Thank you. Ajahn, we have 10 minutes and 3 questions. Oh,
yes.
No, 2 questions. Okay. So, Jingshen, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Canda, for your teaching. From your teaching, I know we should not hold the concept of duality, right? Like day and night, male and female, good or bad, right? But sometimes I feel like the concept of duality, it was like born with us. Like sometimes I feel like this happened, and after many days, I know, oh, that's a duality. I do not have a right view on that. Sometimes I feel like you were born with that, and if it's born with that, how could we against it? How could we overcome it? That's my question.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that might be more of a Mahayana concept. Is that right? This idea that I would be very careful always in the Dhamma of the word should. Okay? Because really it's not about sort of what we should think or shouldn't think, but it's like, what is my mind doing and how is this affecting me? Okay,
Yes.
So when I think in kind of binary ways, what is the impact of that? Some ways of thinking in terms of good and bad, wrong or right, are actually very wholesome, because we do need to differentiate between actions that cause suffering and actions that cause wholesome states to increase. That's an aspect of having right view. So this is actually very important. The Buddha did say there's something called right view and,
Yes.
good and bad conduct. So in that sense, a bit of duality is okay. The only time the mind's really in a state of unity is in deep meditation in the jhanas, but that's not the end of the path according to the Buddha. Yeah.
And if I may,
please.
add another suggestion. There was a sutta in the Buddha where the Buddha talked about, I think the start of the 40s, the great 40s, where the Buddha talked about such a thing called mundane right view and then transcendent right view. So mundane right view, the Buddha said there is father and mother, there is right and wrong, there is teacher and student. So there are dualities. But then transcendent right view, and then maybe there's non-duality. So as Ajahn said, duality is useful. And where it's useful, for example, being virtuous in our conduct, duality helps us do that. And when it does, I think that's when we should apply it. Yeah.
It's basically like we could have a little bit like duality, maybe some like relative truth is necessary in
yes,
right.
they're useful.
We should not just skip the relative truth to the ultimate truth, right? It's like sometimes it's still very necessary to hold it.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Canda.
Thank you, Jingshen. I like to joke that I'm only non-dual half the time.
That's good.
All my jokes are good, Ajahn.
That's really good. I like that.
Okay, Elisa, please unmute yourself.
Hello,
Eliza,
thank
sorry.
you, Venerable Canda.
Hi.
Thank you for the beautiful teaching. It's very, very inspiring, and I was really surprised to hear you talk about a twofold or multifold community. So I think it's a very interesting take, because I know that the fourfold community is often called to defend bhikkhuni ordination, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, I always felt like, yeah, but then it stays very binary. So it's only men and women, and what about all the other one?
Right.
And therefore, I'm like curious how within this very conservative Theravada tradition, it's possible to change a little bit the linguistic. I don't know how. Sorry, English is not so perfect, but how we can go around these teachings and to include more diversity. And also, do you think there is any hope one day to ordain non-binary or trans monastic?
100%. Lots of hope already. Lots and lots of hope. Yeah, thank you for that question. That's great, and I'm so glad that spoke to you. What I would say first of all is that the Fourfold Assembly was meant to be inclusive by design. So it's not that we need to change the teachings or add anything. It's just that we're trying to articulate it in a way that makes that clear, right? So the Buddha was fully inclusive. I do believe that. I really cannot believe that an enlightened person would exclude anybody. That wasn't his aim. And to some extent, it's important to not go to the Twofold Assembly too soon, because we don't want to obscure the diversity before we're there. That's why I like manifold as well. Or maybe you could, I don't know, you could have to count up how many genders there are and then say, okay, the sevenfold or something, I don't know. But there's always scope to expand. The Theravada tradition is not necessarily conservative. I mean, I wouldn't even say I'm a Theravadist, I'd say I'm early Buddhist. So I'm from the Indian early Buddhist tradition, which is the earliest teachings of the Buddha as we have it, as we know it today. And within that tradition, there are people who are more kind of liberal-minded and looking to create more and more opportunities to include. And there are people who are a little bit more conservative, just as we have in the world, right? We have the different kind of political, views as well. So, this is a discussion that happens almost every day at my monastery about non-binary folks ordaining, trans folks ordaining, and there's been a trans woman who's been an anagarika. I don't know what she's doing now. There was a trans man ordained, I think, a couple of decades ago. It's in an old newspaper cutting, which I have somewhere, and he ordained as a Samanera in Sri Lanka. So that's very interesting. But yeah, it's the binary nature of the Vinaya that then becomes a little bit tricky. But most of the Vinaya, the sort of main thrust of it is not really gendered. So I think you can take the principles, and understand how the Buddha laid down the trainings out of compassion, the basic purpose of the rules, and apply it across the genders. I think that's one way we could do it. We can still chant and recite the Patimokkha because it's important to preserve it, but the way each bhikkhu or bhikkhuni actually applies it and lives it is different anyway from person to person. So I think there's a lot of room in there for people to find their way with the Buddha's teachings. It was never meant to be, ossified. It was never meant to be set in stone. It was always a response to a lived situation at the time. Yeah.
Thank you, dear Ajahn. So today I woke up early to do this show, so I'm an early Buddhist today.
You're an early Buddhist. Excellent.
Thank you. We learned so much from you today, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Ajahn, can we invite you to close this session with a prayer or dedication?
Okay, I thought I'd do one which is a little bit of a mix of two, actually. Mm-hmm. The first one is, the meaning is that by the grace of this merit that I have acquired, may I never follow the foolish, but only the wise, until I attain the final goal.
Follow Ajahn Canda. Yes.
No, you've got plenty of wisdom. You've just got humble wisdom, disguised under jokes. You can't get away with that. Okay. May I never follow the foolish, but only the wise, until I attain the final goal of Nibbana. And the next one, we're going to share the merits with our relatives. May they be happy. But remember, when we share with our relatives, we can consider all beings our relatives. Okay? Mm-hmm. It's for all beings. Imina punya kamena mame bala samagamo Satam samagamo hotu yavani banapattiya idam me nyatinam hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo idam me nyatinam hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo idam me nyatinam hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, dear teacher. My friends, let's all bow to our teacher. Thank you so much for being with us today. And that was a beautiful chanting voice. So thank you so much for that too.
Oh, and you're all welcome to come to my chanting session.
Yes, I will announce that very soon.
All right.
Okay, let me do my closer. Okay, friends, as a reminder, this recording will be uploaded onto the Buddhism.net YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, tell your friends. If you would like to show your appreciation and gratitude to our teacher, Ajahn Canda, you may make a donation to Anukampa Bhikkhuni Project. We will share the link by chat and by email. And we have a special treat, as Ajahn says. Roughly 30 minutes from now, so that's 5:30 BST, Ajahn Canda will be leading a chant of the Metta Sutta on her channel. So the link is available by chat, and you heard that voice. So don't miss that. And then in 2 to 3 days' time, we will host an after vibe session. So after vibe is where we gather for peer sharing, reflection, and Dharma exploration. And you'll be led by our own Angela. And then 3 days from now, the revered Zen master, Roshi John Halifax, will be here to give us a Mahayana perspective of the Buddha. And friends, I'd like to remind all of you that our beloved Roshi is already 84 years old. She had open heart surgery twice last year, and a master at her level is very precious. So don't miss the chance to see her and to be seen by her while you still can. So that's happening in about 3 days. And then from July to September, Venerable Thupten Chodron and other venerables from the Sravasti Abbey will guide us on the 3 higher trainings. So again, we'll be sharing the link by chat and by email. With that, my friends, we will see you in a few days. Thank you for being here.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.